All right, welcome back. It was a very eventful 2 weeks since we've been gone. IU unfortunately lost to Ohio State, but Ohio State lost to Michigan the next week. Notre Dame's still been on a tear. Alabama somehow sneaks into the college football playoff rankings this week. Arizona State is on top of the Big 12. The Big 10 championship, not what we thought it was going to be. I don't think any of these conference championships are what we thought they were going to be after last weekend. But here we are. We're in the postseason now. So how are we feeling right now about the rankings and just finally getting to this point in the season for football?
Honestly, I'm not even too mad about it. After the playoff rankings came out last night, we saw a couple things that stood out. I mean, obviously, I think we're all going to lash out on Alabama, first of all. I mean, being 11, that's the lowest they could possibly be since the G5 takes the 12. I think just a couple other things. I don't think any of us thought Boise would be number 4 or the G5 champion would be number 4. I think we would see the Big 12. Obviously, we saw BYU. They've kind of fumbled a little bit in between. And then, obviously, Miami, they lost 2 out of their last 3. Kyle McCord, I don't know. He just started them up the entire game. But for our sake, I guess we're in a good spot with Indiana. Obviously, the loss against Ohio State wasn't what we wanted. But they lost to Michigan, which was great. And Indiana, I think, has a solid spot in the playoffs. Even though it's not a home game, I think it's a great spot to be in, especially coming in ranked, 97th in the country at the beginning of the season.
And I think we were projected to be last in the Big Ten or something like that. Like we were projected last or second to last, and now we're, I think, third in the Big Ten because of Ohio State's loss to Michigan. So that's crazy, crazy jump.
This bracket, I like it. At the end of the day, someone's going to be mad. No one's going to be completely happy. At the end of the day, it's a 12-team playoff now. So, I mean, these are at least the top 10 teams got in, that will be able to play for a national title. And I know, South Carolina fans are mad. Miami fans are mad. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But at the end of the day, the point is to crown a national champion and the person that is the best team in college football. And these teams, I think we have a pretty good list of teams that could win the championship, and that's what you try to put together. And I think the committee has done a decent job. I'm not going to say a great job, but I think they've done an all right job to crown a winner, hopefully, in this bracket. I know seeding's going to change around and stuff based off of the conference championships this next weekend, but we'll see how that works.
Yeah, I think speaking on these changes, I did hear that apparently if SMU loses the ACC championship, they could get bumped out entirely, which doesn't really make too much sense to me because that ACC seems to be the only one that has that standard for them. I guess because SMU's at 8, but the committee also said that they're not going to really move the teams around that much. So
I have a question about
I don't know.
Let's say they don't get bumped out, right? Let's say they lose to Clemson. Clemson gets in because they're a conference championship winner. And let's say they keep SMU in. Does that mean who's getting booted?
Bama.
I'd say Bama would probably get booted.
I'll tell you my rankings. I'll just tell you, right now, I have Clemson being SMU, and SMU would take the 11. Because when you look at SMU versus Alabama, one team has 3 losses to unranked teams. Yep. The other has none. Yeah. They have to reward an 11-1 runner-up ACC title ACC team rather than Alabama, who doesn't make a game whatsoever, has 3 losses to an unranked team. They just got blown out by Oklahoma 24-3. How do you let that happen? And obviously, we talked about Miami and how maybe they should be above Alabama, but how many ranked teams did they play all year? They played none. And obviously, everyone hates on us for only playing Ohio State and getting blown out as the only ranked team that we're playing. But when you look at all the teams that are losing to these unranked teams, we are blowing out those teams. I mean, obviously, Purdue, the worst team in the country, we beat them 66-0. But Nebraska, 56-7. like every win, I feel like is just 2 scores for Indiana, unless it's a tighter game like Michigan, who beat Ohio State. It's I think what's really going to change is it's going to be the teams that are playing, because really you can't have the teams that aren't playing moving around, since you have nothing to base it off of, since they're not playing this week. So really the only moves I see possibly changing are the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 12, or probably the 11. I think overall, I think Tennessee, Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Notre Dame, I think those are all pretty much locks, and Penn State. But yeah, besides that, I don't think really much can be changed.
Yeah, I think that'd be poetry if Clemson ends up beating SMU and then they keep SMU just to take out Alabama. It cracked me up last night because, after they have the CFP selection show, they'll have Ward Manuel, the head chairman, come on, explain like the reasoning of like the group. And he said Alabama is 6-1 against like ranked teams or something like that. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, so they're 6-1 against ranked teams. What's the record against unranked teams then? If that's what we're basing off of. But yeah, I know South Carolina, that's a big talking point right now because they've won 6 straight. They're probably the hottest team in college football, and probably based on eye test, they deserve to be in. But the committee honored the head-to-head with Alabama and Ole Miss against South Carolina. What are your guys' thoughts on South Carolina not getting in?
I mean, I think I'm a little upset for them just because, the way they've been playing, you could argue just looking back at some of the games they played, like LSU, like they should have won that game. And even like the SEC, like commission has admitted that like that roughing the passer call, like after, like on that pick 6 should have been not called. And that would have resulted in South Carolina winning that game. And we'd be looking at a completely different bracket right now, I think, if that loss wasn't counted.
Against LSU.
Yeah, against LSU. We could even see, because they also played Alabama close as well. That's another thing. And I'm pretty sure it came down to calls also. But if those 2 games went South Carolina's way, we could be looking at a completely different SEC championship. We could see Georgia and Tennessee in completely different spots on the bracket. We'd be looking at a completely different layout for this playoff. Possibly 4 SEC teams would be like solidly in, no matter what would happen, if South Carolina had won those 2 games, and they would have been 11-1. And you would think also, I think the last straw for South Carolina was they beat a number 12 ranked Clemson, but that only gets them moved up 1 spot, which doesn't. To me, that doesn't really sit right. And then you've got Alabama, who got blown out by unranked Oklahoma, who at the time was 5-5, like one of the mid to bottom tier SEC teams, formerly a Big 12 team. Got to add that in because, you're looking at Texas, and they're, again, formerly from the Big 12, but they're vying for an SEC championship right now.
Yep.
It really makes you, like, reconsider like how much weight conferences really have in the college football landscape. Like I feel like with NIL and like all these other opportunities for players to like go and play at these other schools, it's really making the field a lot more equal.
Yes.
Like on all fronts. Like just looking at all these teams, like each of these teams I think has vulnerabilities, and there's not, even though Oregon's 13-0, I don't necessarily think like they could still fall easily. Like they could easily lose a game. They played it close with Boise State at the beginning of the year. Like they were losing up until like the last plays of the game. They won by a field goal. Like it just makes you think like, does conference have a certain weight on the way the landscape is? I don't know. It's just crazy to think about. Like it's because that's not how it used to be. It used to always be like SEC dominance. An SEC team has won the national championship for a majority of the past 10 years. Not like maybe 2 by the Big Ten, 1 by the ACC, but the rest have been SEC, whether it's Georgia or Alabama.
I mean, if you look at the rankings right now, and I'll get to the point about like South Carolina only moving up one. You have other teams like us, SMU, Boise State, and when you look at the playoffs last year, they wouldn't make a 14 playoff. Like even this year, they wouldn't, right? But now that there's 12 spots and they have 5 reserved just for the champions, take away the SE or yeah, take away the S or yeah, no, take away the Big 12. That's one because SEC has no play in that. Take away the Mountain West. That's another. There's already 5 spots gone, taken from other teams that wouldn't normally make it in a 14 playoff. So right there, the SEC, yeah, I definitely think the conference has a big part of it. And like for South Carolina, I think, yeah, they've had close games and the calls may have not gone their way whatsoever. But when you kind of get later into the season, I feel like there's not much room to move up just because everyone else is winning and everyone else is kind of hitting stride. And for the teams that are above South Carolina, they've beaten South Carolina. I mean, Ole Miss, they blew them out, 27-3, I think? It was by 20-plus points. So you can't put them above Ole Miss, even though they're kind of struggling. And plus, they have the same record. Then Miami, they're 10-2. They didn't play each other, but you have to respect their 10-2. Cam Ward, he's a Heisman contender. And then Bama, obviously, they also beat South Carolina, even though there may have been a little bit of discrepancy there and that South Carolina should have won that game. And then from there on up, it's just Boise State, IU, and then all other teams that deserve to be where they are. But yeah, from the last 3 weeks in, it's kind of hard for teams to move up because of everyone else above them is just playing at a phenomenal level. And we kind of saw that example with Ohio State. Like Michigan, completely unranked. After, 5 weeks, they haven't been ranked whatsoever. They only moved down 4 spots. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think they should be a visiting team going into the playoffs. I think they should be below Tennessee, and we can obviously get into that if you guys want to. But I think overall, there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room for the teams that are in the bubble right now, which is Miami and Ole Miss. So if you're one of those fans, you're going to root for the underdogs in the conference championship games. Like obviously you have Iowa State, you have Penn State, which obviously won't really make a difference as they're already the 5 seed. But I think the biggest one for them is Clemson. And the conference, it's going to have a big part in how everything else turns out because obviously they talk about like SEC bias, but those SEC teams, they're going to rely on Clemson now. Like they're going to rely on an ACC team to kind of bump out a team that wouldn't generally make it in a 14 playoff, to kind of slide them down and give them another spot, which would probably go to Miami since no one else below them is playing.
Yeah, I love all this talk about the college football bracket, but I do want to talk about Michigan and Ohio State and what we saw on Saturday at noon. I mean, if you're Ohio State, where do you go from here? Because this is the worst Michigan probably will ever be, just from a coaching perspective, talent perspective, and just a year. They just have not had a great year at all. And Ohio State loses to the worst that Michigan will ever be at home, and
20-point favorites.
20-point favorites. When I saw Jack Sawyer pick that pass off in the end zone, I'm like, okay, well, they're gonna pull away. Finally, it never happened. Like you got field goals, kicks missing, 29-yard field goals, 27-yard field goals. Like I just can't help but think maybe they're like over amping themselves up for this game. And it seems like Michigan really is just living rent free in their head. And for the life of me, I can't understand. Like people are saying that Ohio State spent $20 million on this roster. And you mean to tell me like this is the product against the rival? And this is the worst they're ever going to be. Michigan has Bryce Underwood coming in next year, even though they paid him $12 million or however much. But I mean, it's going to be at Michigan next year. I just don't know where you go from here if you're an Ohio State fan.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've been seeing online and on like the talk shows and stuff, it seems like it's going to be national championship or like Ryan Day is out. Like I think that's probably the direction they're heading. I also saw that Urban Meyer has said that he's interested in coming back. So I think things are already getting set up for Ryan Day's exit at Ohio State, whether that be this year or next year if he loses again to Michigan. But yeah, I think it's I was shocked to see that Michigan beat Ohio State. I mean, I had a gut feeling that it was possible just because of the way Michigan plays. Like, they play nitty gritty football, just classic Big Ten football. Like, they win their games on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And Ohio State, I swear, ever since Jim Harbaugh called Ohio State soft, like that first time that Ryan Day was coaching, like, it's just been like Michigan has just been living rent free inside of his head. Like, I feel like he thinks that he has to play their game and beat them at their game just to be like, yeah, we're tough, just like Michigan. We're tougher than Michigan.
Like, when he did that against Notre Dame after the game, after they beat Notre Dame, he's like, this is a tough team right here. Oh, my gosh, dude.
Yeah, where he's like, this is a tough team right here. It's Ohio against the world. And then he goes and, like, a few weeks later, loses to Michigan again.
Just classic, dude. Listen, I think Ryan Day is a good football coach in terms of keeping your team relevant and, having, like, about 9 to 10 wins. He's kind of like a better version of James Franklin, maybe. I know.
I mean, he did beat James Franklin.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying he's a better version, because he always beats James Franklin. It's like Penn State's problem with Ohio State. It's Ohio State's problem with Michigan. It's like a parallel thing right there. I just will say, like, another coach candidate that I think would be great for Ohio State, and honestly would scare me if he went there, is Mike Vrabel. I feel like he could instill, like, some actual, like, hardcore culture over there at Ohio State, but we'll see what happens. I don't know about Urban coming back, if he does, if he wants to, but we'll see.
I'll tell you too, like, I was just looking at the box score, and Michigan won with their leading receiver having 18 yards. Like, how is that possible? And then their quarterback, Davis Warren, 9 for 16, 62 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Like, when you look at that, you would think, oh, yeah, Ohio State blowout. No, Michigan wins by 3. Like, that blows my mind. And to think that Indiana couldn't be somewhat like that. I mean, because I think Curtis Work, he had a similar stat line to that in terms of passing. But on the ground, it was just a disaster. But, no, yeah, I think Michigan and Ohio State's going to be interesting next year, because I think Indiana, I think they're going to kind of fall off a little bit, as I hate to say that. Michigan and Ohio State, they're getting the first and second best quarterback in the class, because obviously OSU's getting Taven St. Clair, and then Michigan, we talked about his flip from LSU to Michigan, or Bryce Underwood. Yep. Yeah. So that's gonna be a great rivalry match to see again next year. Obviously, it's in Michigan, and I think Michigan will end up winning that, because just the house is going to be packed.
If Ryan Day's still coaching, then yeah.
Oh, I hate Ryan Day. I hate James Franklin. But no, I don't know. I think, honestly, OSU, yeah, like you said, they're going to be all in or nothing for Ryan Day. I think this is really his last year to kind of show what he's able to do from a coaching standpoint for one of the most successful programs in recent history in the country. And when you're fighting in a conference as big or as just powerful as the Big Ten, you kind of have to get out of it a little bit and kind of show yourself in this expanded playoff that you can win, and you can win when the lights are bright. And obviously, they didn't do that against Michigan. They did that against us. They did that against PSU.
But not against Oregon.
And obviously, that was a close game. And I would have loved to see what would have happened if they just beat Michigan and they would go again at Oregon. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it could have been flipped. I think Dylan Gabriel, he's outstanding. I think the entire Oregon team, they are just a powerhouse. But I would have loved to see that. But yeah, in terms of Ryan Day, it's a national championship or nothing for him this year.
That's why I love this college football bracket. It's just, if you look at some of these matchups, these teams would never be playing each other if we just did like a normal schedule. Like, so we got Ohio State, Tennessee, and Georgia and Indiana, which will be interesting if that stays the same. Notre Dame and Alabama, and then Penn State and Arizona State. I mean, these matchups are just, you don't see these two teams colliding very often.
Except Notre Dame and Bama, you see them every once in a while.
Yes, those two have had history. And we'll see. I mean, based off of how Bama's looked the past couple weeks, I just don't know what version of Bama I'm getting. I don't know if I'm getting the LSU version where they just walk into LSU and walk them down, or I don't know if I'm getting the Georgia when they play against Georgia version when they go up 28-0, and then in the second half they look like they can't beat anyone. I feel like Georgia and Bama this year have looked unstoppable at times, and then at other times they've looked like they could get beat by anyone in the country. Like it's mind-boggling.
And going back to like Alabama, like I think the reason why they put Alabama above Miami, because even though Alabama did lose, I think the committee is looking at how the teams are performing over the course of the season and their momentum kind of going into the playoffs. Obviously, Miami, they started 10-0, 9-0, one of them, and then they lost 2 of their last 3, both to unranked teams. And I think that's just kind of taking a toll on them because you want to go into playoffs on fire, right? And you talk about like Ohio State losing, and they're going to get punished for losing to Michigan. You don't want to go with your head low on a losing streak, which is why I think they took Miami out for that reason. But for like Indiana, for example, like if they lost to Purdue, they would have been out completely. Like they would have been out of the top 15, maybe even out of the top 20. So the way they were able to blow out Purdue, it was a good showing for them to kind of get themselves back into it. And I don't know if you guys like follow the NBA, but I was just kind of like thinking about it, like NBA Cup, every point matters. Like you'll have teams that are up 5, call a timeout with 2 seconds left to try and just heave up a shot to get more points because like point differential is important. It's the same thing here. Every point matters. And I think running up the score, like although in the NFL it's just kind of like, oh, it's disrespectful, whatever. Here with the expanded playoff, everyone is going to look at head-to-heads and common opponents, and they're going to see how much you won by or how much you lost by. So that's an important part of the way the committee's kind of forming the playoff picture. And I think the way we've seen with Indiana kind of winning by 2 possessions and other teams losing to unranked teams by more than like 2 possessions, that kind of takes a toll on them.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going off that, I guess like my one question would be like, because Alabama doesn't necessarily have the momentum on their side either, because the week before they played Auburn, they got blown out by Oklahoma and didn't score a single touchdown, which is like the first time that's ever happened in a long time. Like normally they're able to score at least 1 touchdown in a game. They were only able to get a field goal up, and they got blown out by more than 20 points as 20-point favorites. So I don't really, at least like in my mind, like Alabama doesn't necessarily have the momentum on their side either going into this playoff. I think if they played Notre Dame today, Notre Dame would blow them out 100%. I think their defense, like their weakness is running quarterbacks and just runners. Yeah. They can't stop the run. And Notre Dame's running backs, like Jeremiah Love, on fire.
Dude,
he's straight up
everyone.
hurdling people.
Yeah.
Like he just floats in the air. He jumps, he floats, and
they're calling him the next Todd Gurley.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, their running backs are insanely good. Notre Dame's offensive line, insanely good, able to create those openings for those running backs to go through. Honestly, I think Notre Dame low-key could be a favorite this year. I mean, the path, like just looking at their path, they play Alabama, inconsistent Alabama, who either looks invincible or looks like a dead horse. Then they go and play SMU, which I think that would probably be a pretty close matchup because SMU is a pretty explosive team. But if Notre Dame's defense is able to get those turnovers kind of early and just establish a lead, I think they probably win that game. And then looking at the next matchups up, like they're probably going to play Texas, I think, because assuming that Texas and Georgia just switch places depending on the outcome of the SEC championship, if Georgia wins, they're probably going to get that 2 spot. I don't know if Texas is just going to take that 7 spot or if they're going to move to like Penn State's 5 spot or how that's going to work. But I feel like they're probably going to play Texas in that semifinal match. I think they could probably beat Texas as well because their defensive line, like their secondaries are really good. Their defensive line is really good. I think they could force some turnovers on Texas as well and beat them. I mean, like this year is probably the year for Notre Dame to win the national championship. I mean, they just look unstoppable.
Yeah. Also, like Notre Dame has been coming on of recent, and I think some Notre Dame fans out there are just waiting for the other shoe to drop because the loss to NIU earlier in the season. I mean, obviously, if they play Alabama like today, I'm kind of leaning towards Notre Dame. At first I thought Bama would just be an offensive explosion, but then we saw what happened the last couple of weeks, and then Notre Dame versus SMU would just be if Notre Dame could win on the trenches, they probably win that game pretty easily. Oregon. Do we still think Oregon is like an elite team and like without blemishes, or like do we think they're the perennial favorite, or do we think they could lose to anyone?
I mean, I think anyone could lose to anyone. I think overall, I think they're the favorite just because 12-0, they're the only undefeated team.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, I think like anything can happen. Like Arizona State can win it all. Like hell, like I don't know. I think anyone has a chance to win it all. I think obviously having the bye week, I think obviously that's huge. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes we see in the NFL too. I feel like having that much time off from playing a football game sometimes ends up hurting you.
Yep.
I think when you lose that like physical contact, like I mean, obviously you have it in practice with your own teammates, but when you go against other teams, it's kind of just like repetition. It's kind of like you feel it out. It's just playing football like you normally do. But when you have that much time off, and even for the teams that are playing the first round, they don't play until the 20th. Like that's still over 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
So that's still a lot of time, and I feel like there's not a thing called like over recovery, but when you have that much time off, it can come back to hurt you. So I think there's a big chance that Oregon or any of the bye week teams can lose, and I think every team that wins the first round, especially if it's an upset, I think they're gonna have a lot of momentum on their side, and they're gonna have their heads up really high, their expectations that they can beat anyone. Like for example, if like Arizona State, if everything holds up the way it does, Arizona State, Penn State. If Arizona State walks in to Penn State and they win, Boise State, that's a very winnable game for them. Like we can see them in the semifinals very easily. So I think anything is really possible. And I think Oregon right now, they are the favorite. I mean, they beat Ohio State, and they have a couple of other like bigger wins that some of the other teams don't have. But I think in terms of consistency, Oregon is definitely number one. And I think overall, anyone can just lose at any given time.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of going off of that as well, I think the bye week that we had before Ohio State kind of ended up hurting us because we started building up. We kept building momentum, and that momentum it just kept getting better and better for us. And then we had that bye week. And then, I mean, Cignetti himself said it in the press conference, like it's hard to simulate like in-game environments, like especially when you're going to a venue like Ohio State where you're packing like 110,000 people in a stadium.
Yep.
It is really hard to simulate that. It's hard to simulate the physicality of the other guys because you're practicing with different people. They're going to play differently. I mean, they're going to try to play the position the same way that the Ohio State players would play, but it's just not going to be the same no matter how you do it. And I think it ended up hurting us because we had the fire before, we had that time off, and then it wasn't there. It took longer for us to kind of, I mean, we got the first score, but it took a little bit longer, I think, for us to just kind of really get set in that environment because there's a few key miscommunications that ended up hurting us. We also had to go to a silent snap count, which also I think hurt us because, I mean, you could kind of see the reaction time was a little bit slower, like with the offensive line than normal. But I think not having a bye week, at least in our case, I think is going to benefit us tremendously. But I mean, for a team like Oregon, where I feel like they need to keep playing to stay consistent, this bye week could hurt them if they win the Big Ten championship. Which, speaking of which, Penn State, according to ESPN, is actually favored to win. They have their analytics say Penn State has a 53% chance of winning, and I have to know what you guys think about that because that to me is wild.
I find it very interesting that they're a 53% chance to win. I will say this. I like Dan Lanning, he like does certain things that, like not a lot of people do. He rattles cages and stuff like that. It wouldn't surprise, like obviously you play to win, like obviously. But if Oregon was to swap places with Penn State, it wouldn't be like the worst thing in the world because the 5th spot in this college football bracket, which they need to update for next year because
Yeah.
the 5th spot is basically the 1 seed because you're playing the bottom team like Arizona State, which is not even ranked in the top 12. They're just going to probably win their conference if everything shakes out the way it does. But it's either going to be them or Iowa State. And then you'd be playing Boise State, which Oregon's already beat. And I think if you were Oregon, you would rather play Arizona State and Boise State rather than either Ohio State again or Tennessee and then go on to play another tough team like Penn State. So I don't know. I mean, Penn State, if they do beat Oregon, it's a weird because football's a game of matchups, and maybe Penn State goes in there and they're like, oh, wow, their defensive line is getting to Dylan Gabriel pretty quickly. And then maybe Oregon kind of rolls over. But we haven't seen that yet. So I think Oregon will end up winning the game. They have been the most consistent team in college football. But we'll see what happens.
I mean, to also get a sneak peek, just at like the Big Ten championship, anyways. And even too, like for the conference championships, or for the conference champions, I mean, in the quarterfinals, they don't get a home game. So really, yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think 53% to win is just ridiculous. But I do think they should be up there just because of, like you said, just how easy it's not even a cakewalk. It's just the matchups they have. It's just in Penn State's favor heavily. And when your one home game is against Arizona State, who isn't ranked in the top 12, it's the G5 champion. Yeah. That's a pretty fairly one-sided game to Penn State, especially in their stadium and just their atmosphere. Those fans go crazy. Over 100,000 can be packed into there. And then from there on out, it's just straight neutral-sided games. And Penn State, obviously, cold state, Pennsylvania, we know how crazy they can get their snow whenever. So when they can go into any neutral site, play in whatever temperature they can, Penn State, they could be heavily favored over some of these other teams. And obviously, Oregon either playing Ohio State or Tennessee, if this is the way the bracket holds up, it's going to be tough. And obviously, we saw with Oregon, their choppiness later in the season. Obviously, they had the close game with Wisconsin. And then from there, they only had Washington. But they're kind of showing signs of slowing down. I mean, they were beating out opponents pretty easily. They wouldn't give up more than 20 points for 4 out of their first 5 games. And then from there on out, they gave up 18 to Maryland, which it's Maryland. I don't know. Obviously, Penn State, they held Maryland to 7 points. Then Washington, 49-21. I mean, even though it was kind of a blowout win, 21 points, representing yourself as the best team in the country, it's not concerning, but it's just when you have other teams that are beating Washington better than you're beating them, it's
like us.
It's kind of a question. Yeah, exactly. But that Wisconsin game kind of scares me. But yeah, I think just because they're 12-0, they're the only undefeated team, I think they deserve to be the number 1 seed. You can't really take anything away from them.
Who do you think wins in that game, Ryan?
The Penn State-Oregon?
Yeah.
I feel like Penn State could sneak up on them. And I mean, it's partially because of what happened in the Wisconsin-Oregon game. I feel like that game, I don't think Oregon was expecting that to be very close, and they won by a field goal.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin is a team that Penn State has beaten. I think they beat them earlier this year. Yeah, Penn State beat them October 26th. It was 28-13. So they held Wisconsin to the same amount of points, but they were able to put up more.
Yeah.
So I think just based off that head-to-head, there is definitely potential for Penn State to sneak up on Oregon and beat them. And I mean, like we've been talking about, Oregon has been vulnerable. They haven't lost. They've been able to win those close games, against Boise State, against Wisconsin. But like Ethan was saying, their defense is allowing these teams to score and kind of hang around more than you think that they should, which is interesting because they also blew out Illinois earlier this year too. So I think the thing with Oregon is the question for them is their defense going to be able to hold up like they have against teams like Illinois, where it's kind of a tougher team, but they're able to just keep them low scoring? Or are they going to play kind of like they did against Wisconsin, where the defense didn't really start kicking in until the fourth quarter
Yeah.
because their defense was on the field for a really long time. I mean, I think that's the way you beat Oregon is you just keep their defense on the field as long as you possibly can. Just try to run out the clock, have as much possession time as you possibly can, and limit Dylan Gabriel and that high-flying offense to the least amount of possession time possible because that limits their opportunities to score.
And then we also have the SEC championship game the weekend. It's Georgia and Texas, correct? I think.
Yeah.
I think that one should be interesting. I mean, Texas, to be honest, offensively they haven't really looked that impressive. Like against Texas A&M, they scored a touchdown with Arch Manning, and I don't know if you guys saw that. I mean, they've resorted to using Arch Manning like Michigan uses Alex Orji.
Yep.
It's very interesting. I just don't think Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback, but I just don't think he has like the it factor to get Texas over the hump. And I only think there's so many plays you can call to help him out. And I mean, I think Texas is still a really good football team, but they should be like the favorite. And they're just not playing the way you would think a Texas team with this type of talent would play.
Well, too, like also Texas let up more points to Texas A&M. Like their offense let up more points than their defense did. Their only points that Texas A&M scored was that pick six, which is crazy if you really think about it. And I think obviously going to Texas A&M and not giving up a single point on defense, it kind of shows that they are like a defensive powerhouse. And obviously the offense is kind of a concern. Like if you look at like some of their more recent wins too, like Arkansas 20-10, that's a little bit of a scare. Vandy 27-24, even though they were ranked 25 at the time, that was a little bit of a scare. Their matchup against Georgia, they lost 30-15. So it's going to kind of be interesting to see how Texas performs. And possibly if Texas wins that game, we could potentially see a third Texas-Georgia matchup in the quarterfinals if everything holds up, if Georgia beats Indiana, which that would be kind of interesting to see how maybe it's like a best of three. Like we'll see how that all kind of shakes out. And obviously that'll be on a neutral site. So from there, it's an even playing field. Like there's no excuses there. Like if you lose, you lose. If you win, you win. Like there's every mistake counts there. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see. And I feel like every week it's always some big SEC matchup between if it's Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama. Like it's always a big game that we see in the SEC. And I think although like I feel like we see this matchup almost every week, Texas and Georgia, I think this is going to be an important one because like you said, I don't know where, if Georgia wins, do they just swap spots or does Texas kind of slide themselves in somewhere where they like host a game as a higher seed? Like do they get Penn State's spot? It all depends because Penn State, they can easily slide into the one if they beat Oregon. So not everything is set in stone yet. I think there's a couple of teams that kind of solidified their spots. Like Indiana, I don't think they're going to move up or down. I think Notre Dame, just because they're not in a conference, they can't really move up or down. I think everything else is kind of up for grabs. Like we know a lot of these teams are going to stay in next week. It's just a matter of where they're going to be placed. I think there's a lot of movement still to go. And I think although the conference championships don't really mean much to the teams down below, it means a lot to the teams that are in here right now because preparation, that's going to be key. Like what are they doing to prepare because they don't know who they're going to play. But we just have to give it a week and see what happens on Sunday.
Yeah, to me, I think Georgia would be heavily favored to win the SEC championship, not necessarily just because they have already beaten Texas earlier this year at Texas, but the SEC championship is going to be in Atlanta. So it's essentially going to be a home game for Georgia.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious to see how that is going to impact this work because they blew out Texas at Texas.
Texas.
But
that was
they also
interesting.
they had great field position consistently because their defense was able to force turnovers.
Yep.
So
And Carson Beck played horrible in that game. He had like 3 picks. I think he only threw for like 175 yards. You are right that every single scoring drive they had was in plus territory. So I mean, Texas is looking for revenge. I think Texas could get revenge on Georgia. I think it's again, I don't know what version of Georgia I'm getting. Because if it's the version against Georgia Tech where you go down 17-0 early on to Texas, you're not beating Texas that way.
No.
You can beat Georgia Tech that way. And I kind of want to talk about if things do kind of stay the same and Indiana does end up playing Georgia, what are your guys' thoughts on that matchup? And do you guys think there's any type of chance IU could pull off that upset?
Ethan, I see you shaking your head. So I'll let you go
Honestly,
first.
honestly, we're gonna have an away game. Like, there's no denying that.
At this point,
Looking at all the teams that we could potentially play, if you want me to be honest, I'd rather play Penn State than all these other teams.
Yeah.
I think Notre Dame, I think the NIU loss is still kind of hanging over their head. I think people are kind of holding that against them. I think if Notre Dame, if they beat NIU, they would be the number 5 right now. But I think playing Georgia, it's tough. I think going to Georgia, because realistically, we talked about it, out of all these teams, besides SMU, we have the smallest stadium. And I feel like we've played way more home games than away games. I feel like our only away games we've had Ohio State, we've had, I don't even know, Washington,
Michigan
MSU.
State,
yeah, like we didn't have many away games.
We had 8 home games this year.
yeah.
That's
out
crazy.
of 12. And that's why we weren't really ready for that noise at Ohio State. So, I mean, honestly, I think that was a really good learning experience for us playing at Ohio State. Do I think we'd have any chance against Georgia? I personally don't see it, but let's just kind of look at what Georgia Tech did, right? All right. So they offensively, they ran the football really well. They whose offense is better? Just like Georgia Tech's or Indiana's, based off.
I think ours is better. I think
Exactly.
ours is better. And I think it's because, not necessarily, because I think the way Georgia Tech was able to stay with Georgia, and this is what they did to Miami as well, they are really good at running the ball on the outside, and they're really good at designed quarterback runs. And I think we could do that with Taven, next year when we have Taven, we're going to have a lot of QB designed runs, I think. But I mean, we've seen those plays, they're pretty explosive when Taven does have the ball and he's running. But with our offense, we're also able to throw the ball. We have some great running backs. Curtis also has a pretty great set of legs. He can run pretty quick. And we've got weapons. We have weapons, so we can do whatever we want.
Here's where I see
But
it kind of.
Georgia's defense, I mean, the key for us, I think, if we're throwing the ball, we have to be able to contain Georgia's pass rush, because that's how they were able to blow out Texas. Their pass rush, they were able to get to Quinn Ewers. They were able to get to Arch Manning. Didn't matter who was at quarterback. They were able to just get to them, bring them to the ground, or force an incomplete pass or an interception. They were able to just force Texas to either have to punt the ball or just turn the ball over on downs or interceptions or fumbles.
And that's where I see either this game becomes out of hand or IU is competitive, whether we can run the football and whether we can protect Curtis Fork. Because Ohio State had a pretty simple game plan against us on defense. They said, we are going to press your receivers, and when we press your receivers, they only have about 2 to 3 seconds to get open, because by the time Curtis Fork looks up, he has a blitz coming from the edge.
Yep.
All types of edges. And I just think if Georgia does that, then they probably win this game pretty handily. But if we're able to get ourselves in 3rd and manageable, 3rd and short, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 4, I think we definitely have possibly a chance. But it'll be tough with that Georgia pass rush, like you were saying.
Also, going back to the Georgia Tech game too, 3 yards could have separated whether that game is in Bloomington or Atlanta. Because realistically, 7-10, that's 3 spots off. If Georgia lost that game, they would have been below us, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think I think honestly it could have been flipped. It would have been Indiana 7 or no. Honestly, no, because I think Indiana would still probably be 8 or 9. But we wouldn't be against Georgia. We may have had a rematch against Ohio State. We could have been going to Tennessee.
We could have hosted Ohio State.
We could have, And honestly, too, if it was switched, Georgia playing in the snow, I don't know how they would handle that. Honestly, they're down south. They don't get that type of weather. And obviously the weather we have here, it's I don't know, 20 degrees, snowing every day. It's bad here. And if we had the weather like we did against in the Purdue game, in our first game, if it was at home, that would be a key difference for the outcome of the game. I think a lot of the planning would have to go more towards the ground game than the passing game. And obviously Rourke, he 6-touchdown masterclass. Like he played outstanding, and I think that's where Indiana kind of gets the edge on that standpoint. But because Georgia Tech kind of lost that, it's now in Georgia's hands to kind of take it away, keep their home crowd more into it, and just give Georgia the big advantage. So if, as like an IU fan for all of us, I just think it's going to be hard wherever we go, and I think we're obviously going to be heavily favored against like whoever we play. But if there is a team I would want to play, I would love to play against Penn State.
I mean, I also would like to play Penn State just because, I mean, it's a Big Ten team that we haven't played, and I think that we match up well against Penn State to the point where we could beat them. Plus, also, I mean, just if we move to where Arizona State was in that 12 spot, we have a pretty great path to the semifinal. Like, that's just the reality of it. I mean, that, like, 5 or 12 spot, if you win, you play the four seed or whatever ranked they are. I mean, Boise State is ranked 10th. So Penn State, as the number 5 team, ranked 3rd, is going to play the number 15th ranked team and the number 10th ranked team in those 4 and 12 spots. But I think just kind of going back to Georgia, we could be looking at a completely different playoff bracket if Georgia had lost to Georgia Tech. We'd probably see Miami in there instead of Alabama, because then Miami would have lost to a team that Georgia had also lost to. Yep. So that one loss would have looked a little bit more respectable. I think respectable enough to keep Miami in this playoff. But now, because Miami just weren't able to close 2 of those 3 games, like they're gone. And that's kind of where the committee's a little bit harsh. But I think there's a lot of unique matchups. A lot of things could change, whether it be Penn State beats Oregon, Clemson beats SMU in that championship, Texas loses to Georgia. If Iowa State beats Arizona State, it's not really going to change too much, just because, I mean, both of them are outside of the top 12 looking in. So no matter who wins the Big 12 championship, they're getting that 12 spot.
Yeah.
But like with the ACC, Big 10, and SEC championships, depending on how those play out, we could be looking at a completely different layout. I mean, even if the Mountain West, like if UNLV wins,
beats
then
Boise.
Is Boise State still going to stay in this playoff? Are they going to boot Alabama out, or are they just going to be out entirely?
If Boise State loses their conference championship?
Yeah.
What's UNLV's record?
10-2.
One of those losses to Boise.
They did say in the committee chair last night, Ward Manuel said that they will rank these teams through the conference championships. But that'd be pretty harsh, like to kick Boise State out completely just from a conference championship. But again, it is like UNLV has had a good year. They're 10-2, but the committees, like, they've been harsh. Like, they kicked out Miami for only having 2 losses, and one, like you said, one of them was very competitive with Georgia and Georgia Tech. So I think they probably do get kicked out just because, the committee, if your strength of schedule is not up to par to their standards, I guess, then an eye test is not up to par. And Boise State has been squeaking out wins the entire year, just barely. They haven't been like leaving no doubt like Indiana when they're beating teams by 30 plus. Boise State just barely winning these games, and hopefully they take care of business, because if they end up losing, I think they get kicked out.
And there's going to be a lot of movement too, just because if Boise State loses, UNLV is ranked below Arizona State and Iowa State. Yeah. So we could see a 16-15 seed in that number 4 spot, which that could bump Alabama out just because you're bringing a team below them up. And that'll be 2 teams that were ranked in the top 12 gone, because Miami is ranked 12th and they're not in there. So Alabama would be gone.
I'll tell you, too, I think one state that Boise has going for them is that they had the second best loss to Oregon. I think Ohio State, they had it the closest completely. The 3-point loss to Oregon, I think, is huge for Boise, and I think the committee will kind of factor that in. And obviously, they've already beat UNLV by 5 or at UNLV. So I think, and Washington State, and obviously Washington State, they've kind of had their moments in and out of the top 25 throughout the year. But I think overall, I think Boise State, I think there's definitely going to be, if they lose, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty for them. And I don't think they'll get kicked out necessarily. I think they will get kicked out if Clemson beats SMU and if UNLV beats Boise. I think they're gonna rather have SMU in than Boise. I think overall, I think SMU is a better team than Boise, and obviously they're ranked higher than Boise State in terms of the Power 4 champions. So overall, they're already thinking to themselves that SMU is a better team than Boise State. So if both lose in the conference championship games, then SMU would be favored over Boise State to get that last for large spot. So I think Boise State, if they really want to solidify their spot, they've just got to beat UNLV one more time. I think if not, their last resort is for SMU to either one, beat Clemson or destroy Clemson, because they want to make sure that Clemson doesn't start riding high and getting a second chance to kind of come in there, take their last spot, and just kick Boise completely out after they've had the 4 seed for, I don't even know, 3 weeks now. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything kind of plays out. And obviously, the Big 12, they can kind of step in and take Boise's spot if UNLV wins, because a lot of those Big 12 teams are ranked higher than UNLV right now. So Arizona State, if they win, or even Iowa State, they can take that 4 spot. And obviously, they were there earlier in the year when the rankings first came out, but because of their slide, it's gotten hard for them to kind of climb back in, but eventually they've gotten there, and they have a chance to possibly come back in here and reclaim that 4 spot if UNLV wins.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, especially SMU, I love their story. I think the one thing the committee, really got right was SMU. Having them, in the top 10, as a 3 spot. I really think that they're respecting SMU, and I think just the jump that SMU has made from being group of 5 to on top of the ACC is just great to see, and I think it's great for college football just because it kind of blurs those lines of conferences.
Yep.
And it allows for I think it helps eliminate bias a little bit, and I think the bias is only going to go away with time as these teams from supposedly lower conferences, get better and start winning. And I think this 12-team playoff gives them a greater opportunity to get themselves a national championship.
Yep.
And for it to be more undisputed, I guess. Because I feel like with the 14 playoff, we saw recently with UCF, I think in 2017, they claimed a national championship after being 13-0, even though they didn't make it into the top 4. Yeah. But they were able to claim a national championship. But let's quickly do our rankings. I guess I can go first. Mine is kind of like the committee's, except it's a little, well, not really. There's some things that are the same, but there's some things that are drastically different. I have Oregon at 1 and Texas at 2, which that's pretty undisputable, I think, at this point. But I have Notre Dame and Penn State switched. I have Notre Dame at 3 and Penn State at 4. I liked the way Notre Dame played against USC a lot.
I don't think that you can't have the highest they can be is number 5.
No, not with the playoff, not with the bracket.
But
just overall rankings. Overall rankings. Okay. I have them at the 5 spot in the bracket.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then I have Ohio State at number 5. So I have them a little bit high, but that's just because they lost in a rival. Sure, it was at home and they were 20-point favorites and everything, but for me, there just wasn't really a lot of room for them to move down. I didn't really know who else to put above them. I have SMU at 6 and Indiana at 7, just because I think right now, I think the Big Ten low key is a tougher conference to play in at this point this year. I feel like the SEC is it's regressed. I think
I agree.
over the past few years. It's not the same conference as it was, like pre-COVID. I think the SEC has been slowly regressing. We've seen a lot of players like transferring out of the SEC to other like ACC and Big Ten schools. So I think for me that's why I have Georgia at 8 and Tennessee at 9. That's why I kind of have them below Indiana and SMU, because I think the ACC and Big Ten is extremely underrated, at least in comparison to the SEC, based on the way ESPN talks about the SEC. I think it's actually crazy how much they glaze the SEC. Then I have Arizona State at 10. I think the way they played Arizona, they were finally able to show that like they were able to close out a game, because the past few games, like they go out, get an early lead, and kind of like Miami, like they kind of let the other team come back. They're able to like hold them and not let them win, but they're able to put up points and come back. But against Arizona, they were able to just bury them alive, and they just did not let up. And I think that was, for me, I think that was good enough to put them into 10, because they went on the road in a rivalry game. And Arizona beat them last year like 59 to like 22 or something. So it was a huge game for Arizona State. And then I have Miami at 11 and Boise State at 12.
Okay. Yeah, so my rankings here, I'll kind of go through them quickly. I have Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, Notre Dame at 3. I have Ohio State at 4 because, like you said, I just don't really know where to kind of put them. Like, they still do have like a really good roster. I just don't know in the big games and when they're playing a physical team what they're gonna do. I have Georgia at 5, Penn State at 6, because again I just don't know where to put Penn State, and then. This is where I kind of get more into projections land, I guess. I have Alabama at 7 with in mind if they play like the way that they're capable of playing, like if they go into LSU.
Interesting.
It's a hot one. It's a hot one. I got Indiana at 8, Tennessee at 9, SMU at 10, South Carolina at 11, and then Boise State at 12.
All right, so I did mine by bracket by accident. That's why I called you out on Notre Dame being the 3 seed, because I thought that's the way you're doing it. So yeah, I have Oregon 1, Texas 2. I said it earlier. I have Clemson 3. I think they can rebound. I think knowing that Syracuse gave them another chance, I think they're going to kind of use that to their advantage. I think they can beat SMU. So I think Clemson gets 3. I think Boise holds on against UNLV, so I think they'll get the 4. Penn State 5. I think just playing the best team in the country, and I don't know. I think it'll be closer than a lot of people think it will be. I think Drew Aller and Dylan Gabriel, they're just, I don't know. I wouldn't say they're similar, but I think they'll have similar stat lines in this game. I think it'll be a run-heavy game. I think we'll see a lot of Tyler Warren for Penn State, so I think we'll kind of see that. I think Notre Dame will be 6 since they can't really do anything. I have Ohio State 7. I think Georgia, I don't know how they're really going to do against Texas. I think it's going to shock a lot of people, even though Georgia won the first matchup. I think Texas is going to kind of show out, and I think their defensive performance against Texas A&M, I think not giving up a single point on that side of the ball, I think they're riding high, and they know what's kind of on the line. So I think that momentum going in, I think that's why I'm kind of respecting Texas and dropping down Georgia. So I have Ohio State 7. I have Georgia 8. I have Tennessee 9, I have Indiana 10, and then I have SMU, who will be 11, and then Arizona State being 12.
I feel like just looking at all of our like rankings and bracket setups, like I think they're all feasible, low key.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of wiggle room. I think we all have the right teams. It's just a matter of where they're going to be placed going in. Like,
yeah.
I think the only substitution that you could possibly make is either will UNLV come in, will Clemson come in, and will Miami come in? Because obviously that last at-large bid, will Alabama get bumped down, Miami come in, or will it be one of the current top 4 spots? Will they just get bumped down like SMU or Boise?
Yeah, there's just so much to. I mean, because at first, like when I first looked at the bracket, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, okay, nothing is really gonna change after these conference championships. But then just looking back at how the just season as an entirety has played out there, and just after like talking with you guys, like there's so much that could happen after this weekend. There's like we're going to look at a completely different bracket, I think, after this weekend. I really do.
Every time we talk or make a prediction about a game, like I can even remember back a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Tennessee and Georgia, and we were sitting down here and we were like, I remember you guys saying, oh, Tennessee, yeah, they're looking pretty unstoppable now. I think Tennessee beats Georgia or whatever. And then, boom, Georgia beats them by 14. The whole thing just gets shaken up. And like you said, after this weekend, we could be looking at a whole different bracket. I mean, it'd be crazy to see UNLV in here. Like, I didn't even think about that, to be honest, until Ethan brought it up, how they could beat Boise. Like, it's crazy to see teams like in here that you just normally wouldn't see. And I mean, I think it's great for the sport. This has been one of the most entertaining regular seasons that I can remember.
It gives other teams a chance that aren't usually in the 14 playoff. And obviously we saw FSU kind of get scammed out of their spot, even though they got blown out 63-3 last year against Georgia. But it gives other teams that we don't generally see in that 14 playoff kind of try and make a name for themselves, give like high school players a different perspective of other schools that they could potentially go to. And obviously IU, that's one of the big ones. Like obviously we had Byron Baldwin, LeBron Bond, like they're both going to be 4 stars that are coming here. And it's good for some of these teams that don't generally get this like national recognition finally kind of step into the spotlight, like ASU, Boise State, possibly UNLV.
It's great for the sport.
It's great.
It's great for the sport. And hopefully we keep having this level of balance where Georgia can get beat on any day, Alabama can get beat on any day, and we're seeing some like smaller teams that you wouldn't normally think are that good just dominate teams. Like Indiana was the story this year. So I mean, I hope we just continue to see like an upward trends like this, especially for balance. Like I want to see like parity across the board here for college football next couple of years, hopefully.
It makes it so much more entertaining to watch.
Yes.
It gives us so many more games to watch, because I feel like even this year, like there'd be some weeks where it'd be like, oh, well, there's nothing really going on. And the next thing you know, like there's like Georgia's on the ropes, or like Ohio State's on the ropes against Nebraska. Like you wouldn't expect them to be on the ropes against them. Like,
no, yeah.
There's just so much more entertainment value, I think, with the sport. I mean, kind of with the NBA, like it's kind of the opposite, because like the NBA right now, I think they're like abusing the 3-ball to the point where like it's not that cool anymore, and like the offensive and defensive schemes like all look the same like for each team. And I think college football is kind of going in that opposite direction, which I think is
every
really
team's
good.
unique.
Yeah,
every team's unique. You have the passing offense of like Washington from last year with Penix where they could sling it, and then you have the championship game last year where Michigan just says we're gonna run it to death.
We're gonna run it down your throat.
To run it down your throat, and that's, I mean, it really is cool to see the duality of each team, and the fact that like an academy like Army can like just do the speed option for life and never change their ways. I mean, it's so cool. That's what I love about college football.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. We'll see you guys next week with, I think next week, do you guys want to do a, because at that point, we're going to have,
We'll have the rankings
by Sunday.
Yep.
And we'll also have a like a complete bracket. Like we'll know exactly where the teams are going to be and everything. Do we want to do just like kind of like March Madness where we will like fill out a bracket?
Oh yeah,
just
the
like
50K playoff pick 'em, baby. Let me get my 50 bags. Let's go. That's mine this year.
Let's do it.
No, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll do it.
No, I think honestly, like that's what they should do. They could turn it into like a March Madness type thing, except it could be like, I mean, they'd obviously have to call it something else because it's not in March.
What do you think the maximum amount of teams would be like? You'd be like, okay, this is a lot, like for college football. For you,
I feel like 20. I feel like 20 would be a lot. I did see people were saying like we should make like an NIT bracket
Ugh.
For like, you know, like college basketball is the NIT bracket, like for
Yeah.
all the teams that don't make March Madness. Like,
yeah.
we should do that for college football, except it'd be like just the remaining teams in the top 25 that just didn't make.
Didn't make it.
Yeah, they just didn't make it.
That would be.
I think that'd be pretty fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna have some filled out brackets for you guys next week. We could honestly record earlier, probably.
We can
Also,
record Monday.
we could record Monday if you
normal
guys
Mondays,
are
baby.
available. Also,
Oh, man.
Monday, we'll record Monday. Latest, like it'll probably be up as Wednesday, just because it's
Gotcha.
dead week. So it might episode might go up sooner
Yeah.
then. But yeah, lots of exciting stuff in college football. I think it only gets better. So we'll see you guys next week.